Very banana business.
We talk about the things you think about. Hello, hello. Hi, Barry.
Hello, how are you today?
Good. And how are you?
I'm all right. I'm okay.
So in today's episode, we're going to go a little bit off the rails and have a bit of an educational style of podcast where we are going to target politics. And not in the boring sense, but I don't know about you guys, I'm a bit of a political virgin, and a lot of the terminologies used today, I'm not very familiar with them. And we often have these conversations with Barry where I keep asking him, what does this mean? What does that mean? And then one day we thought, why not make this into an episode? So I turned to the expert in the room, which is you, Barry. What do we actually mean by politics?
Well, politics could mean a number of things, I guess. It depends on the context you're using it in. But I guess before we talk about the word itself, let's just talk about the origin. Where did this word come from and what is it related to? So if you go back far enough, you could see that the word politics is related from the Greek word polis. And polis in Greek means a city-state. And you can find this, if we want to call this root, you can find it in lots of other words that we use every day in English.
That's
words
true.
like police, cosmopolitan, metropolitan, even in names of cities. Minneapolis, Tripoli, right? Or Tripolis, as sometimes historically was called. So all of this is from the same root of polis, which you can find in politics. But I mean, if we're talking about political activity itself, well, that's as old as time. I mean, it's been there ever since humans first settled in cities after the agricultural revolution. There was this shift of lifestyle from hunter-gatherers into more stable and more established cities. And of course, when you have a large number of people who are living in one area, naturally you will have hierarchies. You'll have a ruling class, armies, frontiers, wars, and all of that. So this, one way or another, will involve political dealings or political activity. But if we want to be more specific, what we mean by modern politics, it's a thing that more or less started around the French Revolution in the 1700s, around that time. That's where we get the modern politics as we're more familiar with the kind of politics you hear on everyday news.
Okay. What about I've heard this many times and I never knew what it actually means. And recently you explained it to me, but I'm going to mention the question one more time so you can explain it to our listeners. Left wing, right wing. And usually in elections, these words are thrown around, left and right, pun intended. What do they mean? What is it? What is this? What do these terms mean?
Well, I think nowadays most people, especially the younger generation, I think they kind of reject the whole right-left label, and most people will say their political views are more nuanced, more sophisticated.
So this
they think this whole.
This is an old-fashioned expression.
Kind of. At least its history is kind of old-fashioned.
Okay.
Which we'll talk about now. But some people just don't identify with being left-wing, being right-wing. And there are, lots of reasons for this, because for many people, like I said, they think it's inaccurate. Some people think it's just kind of insulting because it's usually used by the other party to make fun of the others. Right-wing and for a left-wing person is, it's an insult, and the other way around, vice versa, and so on. But its history is sort of interesting because its history is it's a literal thing if you think of its history, because around the French Revolution in the National Assembly, supporters of the king, they sat on the right, and supporters of the revolution, they sat on the left. And this seating arrangement sort of took hold. It continued even after the French Revolution. And if you even go further into trying to analyze this whole left-right thing, you can see that there's even another symbolic meaning of the word left-right. If you think a little deeper about it, I mean, the word left or the left side is always, it's always associated with evil. And you've got words like sinistro in Latin, meaning left. And I'm sure that most
also
cultures around
probably means sinister, like we do.
exactly in English, yes. And the Latin word is sinistro, so there's it's like mankind and humanity as a whole has this prejudice against the left side. You can see it in all kinds of cultures, if not all the cultures around the world, where there's always some kind of taboo regarding the left hand. The lefties are always thought about
a bad omen.
Exactly, yeah. They're poor lefties.
Poor lefties.
Our sympathies with you guys. So yeah, the left side and left-handed people, always had to face some kind of prejudice. So you've got this issue, the left side. And if you see on the other hand, if you see the word right, I mean, in English, the word right as a direction is written and it's spelled, pronounced the same way as right, as opposite of wrong. So it can't be it can't be any more obvious than that the right side or being right is a good thing, or there's this positive connotation with it. And you can see that there is a bit of a symbolism in the whole left, even if it's not, it's not political per se, but there is this value given to each one at the expense of the other. But this doesn't necessarily translate to the values of the right being better than the left, or the left being worse than the right. It's just how it started. Like I said, it started in the French Revolution. It was just a seating arrangement, and the way that people were identified, it continued. It continued after that. But of course, later on we'll maybe discuss a few values that each group maybe favors or emphasizes. So there are, of course, more than just a difference in seating arrangement between the two groups.
Okay, can you tell me more now? Like, I'm a bit impatient for delayed gratification. I want to know now, what differentiates left from right? What values do each one of them hold individually? What are some examples?
Yeah, well, for example, let's take the left wing, okay, left wing policies. Most of the time, left wing politicians or activists or people who adopt left wing policies, most of the time they emphasize values like freedom of speech. Maybe freedom of speech is a little more sort of classical, liberal kind of value, but at least historically speaking, people on the left, they were the ones who were against the monarchy. They were the ones who called for more freedom of speech. More recently, if we check left-wing policies and the values they promote nowadays, they're more revolved around human rights, reform, equality, fighting discrimination in all its forms, whether it's racism, sexism, fighting hate speech. All of these are values which we could roughly lump as left-wing. Okay. But if we want a more concrete example, I guess, for example, let's think of a policy that would make immigration a lot easier for immigrants. Think of the mass immigration of refugees from the Middle East to Europe, to Western Europe, especially Germany. This could be thought of as a left-leaning policy, because most of the time left-wing politicians are usually pro-immigration. So this is a big issue that I think both parties, they kind of disagree strongly on. Typical right-wing politicians are sort of, I don't want to say anti-immigration. Some of them can be, but many of them are kind of cautious when it comes to immigration, especially mass immigration like the one that happened in 2015. But like I said, the left-wing policies, left-wing politicians tend to be more pro-immigration. Now, if we want to talk about the opposite side, if we want to talk about right-wing values and the things they hold dear, we could see a more emphasis on duty, honor, tradition, nationalism, social hierarchies. It feels like right-wing politicians are more interested in maintaining order, tradition, religion, or at least historically, it was the rule of a monarch, like the French Revolution example I mentioned. The supporters of the king were the ones on the right side in the National Assembly. So if we think of a policy, for example, which maintains state power, prevents mass immigration, or for example, a policy which promotes or implements or tries to strengthen national sovereignty. One example that comes to my mind right now is the Brexit and the events and the vote, and the whole mess that happened in the UK because of this vote. And the people who voted for Brexit are usually they're usually lumped as right-wing supporters, or let's say they have right-wing tendency. These people who voted for Brexit, most of them did so because they saw the EU as a threat to their national sovereignty, and this is usually the typical reason that most pro-Brexit people, or the people who voted in favor of Brexit, would tell you. And more or less, we could call these people, or we could call the policy itself, or the value that made them vote in favor of such a policy, we could call it right wing, I guess.
Okay, so let me get this. Let me see if I've got it correctly. The right wing would more promote national thriving. So right-wing policy members would be more, I mean, under a right-wing policy, you would see a lot more of the country's local businesses thrive. They would be more pro everyone in the country that are nationals have jobs, while the left-wing kind of opens it up to the world, which could be great too, because it allows all-inclusive, everyone is one, it doesn't matter where you're from. So in both cases, one is looking out for number one, and the other one, which is not wrong, of course, does that make sense? Am I explaining it more or less? Right?
You're making sense. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're making sense, but the way in which politicians of each respective party would see it is kind of different. Because, for example, the politicians who are pro-immigration, one of the reasons they would give for being pro-immigration is the economy.
So more,
because they would say
they would have more support, and it would expand the economy to have more consumers.
More consumers and producers, because in many countries in Europe, you've got an aging population because of the low fertility rate. And, kind of young blood is good for the economy, as a left-wing politician would probably say. But on the other hand, the right-wing politician would probably think in a very different way. They would think of these immigrants would be a threat to the well-being and, let's say, the cultural or the political fabric of the host country. So they would see it more as a threat, whether it's to small business, whether it's the problem with wages, because immigrants tend to take smaller wages, or they accept smaller wages, and this is a threat to the nationals, to the locals, exactly. Because, for example, let's say I have a garage door that I need painted, right? So if I was in the UK and I wanted a British or an English painter, he would cost me a lot more than an immigrant from the Middle East or from Eastern Europe or from, I don't know, Latin America or whatever. You get the idea? So of course I'm going to get the immigrant because I want to save money, but this is going to cause a lot of problems to the British national, because the British painter is probably part of some kind of union. Maybe they pay taxes. Maybe he's registered with I don't know, some kind of council or something. He's paying probably more than the immigrant, who's not exactly, especially if the immigrant is still not a resident and is in a sort of a gray area. They can afford to work for lower wages. If you get what I mean.
Okay, so now I'm getting flashbacks of moments where I've heard, we hear them in movies, these lines of "go back to your country, these immigrants are stealing our jobs." now it makes more sense, because obviously, I mean, it's a no-brainer. I'm sure I probably, if I thought about it longer back then, I would have figured out why. They come in and they do take they do the same job for less money. In many cases they could be just as good, maybe not even just as good, but still they'll take less money, and then the locals are the one that are losing on this. Which brings me to a thought about perhaps something we can speak about in another segment. What is better? Is it better to expand and become more global, to have more people included in a society and circle and community? Let's say, are we supposed to expand that big? Big cities. Is it good for is the expansion of how many people are living in one place more important than the health of the people? I'm not sure if I'm phrasing this correctly. Or is it better to stay in smaller segments, smaller groups? Does that make sense? Can you rephrase what I just said? Because it just
I think you're trying to see, maybe you're trying to see if there's a value in mass immigration where there's the idea of no borders, and it's one big cosmopolitan planet and everybody can move freely.
Yeah, well, there are benefits of that because the way you said it, like the one of the reasons why left-wingers choose to open borders to invite, because there's younger people, because there's it's good for the economy, which means expansion, which means we're thinking globally. But is that necessarily good? This obsession with growing the economy, of making more money, is this healthy because at the end of the day, it also, like you said, if there is too many people flooded in one place, then there is a lot bigger chances of poverty and poverty pockets. There's a bigger chance of groups being excluded, people having losing jobs because of others that are taking less money for the same, more or less, service. So do you get what I mean?
Yes, I think I got what you mean, but the issue is, for example, a right-wing politician would probably say this whole global market or globalization in this way, it's against the national interests of the people. A good recent example of a politician who thinks like this is Trump. Take Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
Donald Trump was always, with his slogan, "Make America Great Again," American jobs, American factories, American industry, American. He was. I don't know if we could call him a right winger, but he's certainly, he's more to the right than the left, as most of the Republican Party is his party. And he would see that especially unskilled or unregulated immigration is a negative to the host country. It's not a good thing. But there's another issue which is even broader than just the economy. There's the problem of cultural assimilation.
Meaning?
Do these immigrants assimilate or not? This is the issue. Most right-wing politicians would say no, they don't really assimilate. They just live in pockets that where they can continue their cultural norms and live their own, in the same style that they lived in their countries of origin. They continue to live like this in the host country, and this leads to more societal, let's say, division and divide. And but left-wing politicians would say no, we need multiculturalism. We need a variety, in diversity. There's strength in diversity because we've got diverse cultures, diverse religions, diverse. So this is another issue. It's not just economy. It's also society. It's
really confusing. On one hand, I see both sides have a good point. I can't choose particularly one side. I see that right wings try to preserve and keep things steady. When we start expanding, while it's great and we start mixing cultures together, we become one, unity and diversity, like you say. But at the same time, this also causes instability. People don't assimilate. A lot of people are left without jobs because you try to open up to a cheaper market because of this. So it is actually, it's really interesting. Maybe we can definitely visit this one on a different scale type of conversation and debate whether this is which one is the healthier. I'm very curious to see what are the effects on the brain as well, when we're thinking more globally. Is it because we come from tribes? We used to move around in smaller groups and live in communities until, you know, the big metropolitan cities opened up, and it became a norm for everyone to go in the big city, for everyone to go and look for jobs there. But I don't know, benefits to both sides, I suppose.
True. Yeah. If we want to be really rough about it, we need both, which is funny because you do have some people who are actually in the middle.
Yeah, that was my next question. Are there people that are neither left nor right?
Yes, these people usually they call themselves centrists. So, I mean, officially there is a political position of being a centrist, which is neither left neither right. But like I said, because if we want to be a little more technical or specific, even left and right is too vague. It's too broad because let's take different labels which might be considered right, or which might be considered not right, not left. For example, conservative. Even though I take it back, because conservative usually is more right wing. Conservative. Liberal is sort of more left wing. Libertarian is sort of in the middle. Most people think it's more of they share too many similarities with conservatives, but usually libertarians, I think the most important thing for people who are libertarians is that they want less government involvement. They prefer small governments. By small, I mean not members, obviously. I mean the impact of their policies on a large scale. So a libertarian person, for example, would prefer a federal system, just like the USA, where each state has its own, not complete autonomy, but in all minor policies, it goes back to the state on a state level, and only very big policies come from a federal level or from a government level. You get the idea. So there's less authority. A libertarian person would favor very little involvement, very little top-bottom involvement from. They hate the idea of big governments. So, for example, a libertarian person would be very much against a communist or a socialist government, because they feel that a communist or a socialist government would probably overstretch and sort of get into the minute and tiny details and tiny policies of everything.
True.
So a libertarian person wouldn't want something like this. And you've got even liberals. It could mean more than one thing, because classical liberal or the old liberal is sort of different from the progressive kind of liberal that we have today. So it's even the name itself, it can change with time. So it isn't one exact thing. And again, even from one country to another, there is a bit of a difference. It's not exactly the same, because every country has its own sort of national, I don't want to say problems, but it has its issues or it has its agendas, which might not transfer to another country. So let's say a conservative British citizen might not get along with a Republican, even though classically they would be both sort of right-leaning on the right side, but they might not have exactly the same values, because the small details, the differences between the social, the economic, and the political issues of the UK might be quite different from the USA.
Mm-hmm.
So even these core values, they don't necessarily match or map on one another. And then you've got the other issue with extremes, and this is what you usually hear in the news. You've probably heard the expression,
mm-hmm.
far right. There was a far right, far left attack. Far left, you might not hear it, but far right, you'll definitely hear it on the news. And far right policies are always associated with Nazism, the Nazi Party, Hitler's party in World War II, fascism, especially Mussolini, for thinking of fascism. These two words have, I think, in my personal opinion, they've been a little I think, overused or used maybe in a more hyperbolic kind of sense, in an exaggerated sense. Because if we think of these two policies, these two extreme right policies, Nazism and fascism, they're specific to Nazi Germany and Italy during the World War II period. Then you've got, for example, communism, which, for example, people who are against communism or on the right side would call it also far left. And even communism itself, it's not just one thing, because the communism of Soviet Russia, especially under Stalin, and the communism of Mao Zedong's China is different. It's not exactly the same. So there are some sorts of differences, but the issue is these two, the extreme, the far left and the far right, if you want to use these two phrases, these policies, or the governments which were under control of such policies, both of them, they've led to the death of hundreds and millions of people, at least just in the past century alone, the 20th century. And that's why in most Western European countries, they just simply ban far-right groups, like neo-Nazis or skinheads, or these people. They usually just don't give them any leeway to organize or to have any kind of political activity, which is a bit of an issue, because some people say if you push these groups underground, they'll just end up getting more momentum. They won't be in the forefront. You won't know what they're up to. Anyways, it's
so
a bit of an issue,
being far right, does that generally promote aggression?
Probably it will be an extreme form of nationalism. Remember, when we talked about that right-wing policies in general, they're more nationalistic or proud or that kind of thing. With these groups, the far-right groups, they're more on the racist kind of spectrum. They believe that anybody who's not from their country doesn't deserve to live, for example. So these people, these skinheads or neo-Nazis or any kind of other right-wing, extreme right or far-right group would probably, harass immigrants, maybe hurt them, maybe even in some cases kill them. You get the idea. So they're a bit of an extreme case. I don't know how many of them there are. They certainly don't have any political power, because they're banned from being politically active. So, but like I said, they're quite against immigrants, for example. They can be.
They sound like a right wing on steroids.
Yeah, that's the idea. Yes, right wing on steroids, and yet it's true also on the other side. Just think of the Soviet Union during World War II, and the gulags, and you've got Mao Zedong's famous what was it called? His policy, the march forward, the Great Leap Forward. It's millions of people died from starvation because of this policy. So it's over involvement of government. It's over centralized. It's a centralized government that's overreaching in a way. This is a negative aspect of communism in general.
Okay, I'm definitely getting more of this. My next question is, what does this all have to do with social activism, demonstrations and protests and that kind of thing? How does that connect to politics?
Okay, excellent question. Yeah, this is actually the second side of politics that we haven't discussed until now. I mean, because when you talk about the word politics, this is what, in a more academic sense, it means. It just means right, left, conservative, liberal, libertarian, communist, social democrat, and all of that stuff. But there's another side. There's another side to being political or politics, which is new and quite interesting. It's a bit different, and I think this is a recent interpretation, like I said. And if we follow the thread, we can see that this started with the second wave of feminism around the 60s and 70s, and there's with this famous statement of the personal is political. And this is a new game, a completely new game, which is trying to get politics into everyday affairs. And in a way, if you think of how they live, these early feminists, the second wave feminists at least, they saw that lots of challenges that women face or faced, if we're using the past tense, because things are better. Maybe not all feminists would agree with this claim, but for the sake of argument, let's say things have improved a little bit since the 60s and 70s for women. But at that time, these women saw that, their usual challenges such as gender equality, workplace opportunity, their reproductive rights, they saw these issues, which are personal, you would say. They saw them in the hands of more powerful people, more powerful politicians, and more specifically, powerful men. And therefore, they saw it not as a personal problem that each woman is facing alone, but they saw it as a political problem related to power imbalance in society. And therefore, they tried to change or to improve or to ameliorate their circumstances by means of active protests, strikes, political activity. And this trend, or this, let's call it a technique, we see it with other activists, not necessarily the feminists. You could see it with activists and protesters who usually come out against issues such as systemic racism, which according to its proponents, it's widespread, it's prevalent in all Western societies. And I think the most recent example is the Black Lives Matter. One thing led to another, and you had these mass movements of people, protesters, and even the same thing, not just for racism. You can see it with transgender rights, free speech, pretty much every issue which would have been classically thought of as something personal or social is now political. And it feels like everything has been politicized. And if you go on Twitter for a bit, you can see just how much pretty much everything is politicized. And you can see politicians, rather than talking about large-scale policies, they're talking about these things. They're talking about rights. They're talking about racism, vows to fight systemic racism, more transgender rights, more, less hate speech. And for a classical politician from, let's say, 300 years ago, I would imagine if we brought someone from the French Revolution and put them in the world of politics today, they would be very confused. They would think, what does this have to do with politics? But this is, like I said, it's a new interpretation, and most young political and social activists are political in this sense, rather than in the classical sort of right-left political sense.
This brings me to a contemplative type of question. Well, okay, so since we know the world that we know today, these things somehow have been placed in politics, have become, personalist, political. Where would we place them otherwise? I mean, I'm not directly asking those questions to you. If you do have a hypothetical answer, a possible thought on it, go for it. But where would we place those laws of whether it's transgender, Black Lives Matter, freedom of speech, women's rights to their bodies, and so on? Where would we? I mean, if it's not political, then what is it?
Well, at least back in the day, it was just personal. If you were a woman, you'd probably have, it'll be a little harder for you to get a job because you might be expected to take your traditional role. So I think it would be more in the social domain, more in the kind of the family dynamic, that you need to figure it out with your husband, with your father, with your brother, with your siblings, whatever it is. It was more in the familial, family, more in the kind sort of family dynamic thing rather than political. But I do see the rationale for making it a political issue, because these people wanted something that would kind of guarantee their rights from the top. Yeah,
the stuff that's been going on recently on transgender and the laws of people institutions not being allowed to deny them housing or deny the normal rights that every other person wants. And many people would think like, well, how come they have to pass a law on this? They have to pass a law on what they're called. And then at the same time, if you yeah, it's kind of like back in the day, women didn't have any rights to vote. They didn't have any possibilities, not many opportunities to work. And maybe it was weird then when the laws were first passed to say women have now the right to vote and the right to work. And it was like, how come this needs to be politicized? Why does this have to become political? Maybe the other option, if it wasn't politicized, would it be maybe through schooling, like through education? Maybe the education system had to be changed to be inclusive, that if we never, I'm just imagining a different reality, a parallel universe, if you will, where none of this was turned to politics, but rather it was turned to educate the social system, rather than implement laws. Maybe teach it at schools, teach it as women they have their place in society. Women's bodies have rights. Woman gets to choose, and it's just something that is maybe indoctrinated would be too strong of a word, but it will be something that would be taught to people from one generation to the next. And I don't know, would that make sense? Would that even work? Alternative reality, I mean.
No, theoretically it does work, and this is what's been going on. For example, kids' curriculums nowadays are completely different. I mean, not just the curriculums, just their cartoons. Think of the cartoons that kids watched in the 70s and the 60s and the 50s. Completely different. The level of violence in Tom and Jerry, you won't find it in today's cartoons, because they consider that kind of slapstick humor. It's too violent. But because each generation has its norms, and education changes accordingly. And in today's if you see most of what the children study today is very, very different. I mean, I'm not talking about the scientific, let's say, improvements or developments. I'm talking more about the social and the political issues, because children are taught to be more inclusive. They're taught to respect people of color, or they usually abbreviate it POC, to accept people who are not on the kind of the same male female the gender binary, and they say that they're teaching kids that this doesn't exist. There's no such thing as a fixed gender, or there are so many other things.
Yeah. So it is possible.
It's a reality now. Yeah, they're teaching kids these things. But again, this will cause problems with the parents, because for each parent, they would like the values. Yeah, they would like the values they believe in to be the ones instilled in their kids. So again, this education and politics
naturally
sort of affects one another.
We naturally, people have kids in order to have little copies of themselves. You got your little army. So yeah, of course, people would be a little bit pissed off if the values that they have at home are not matched at what is being taught at schools. And new values are scary. Old dogs learn new tricks very difficultly. So
True.
This has been great, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know what you think about all this. We'd love to hear what your thoughts are, and it's been quite educational. Please do comment below on questions and thoughts and ideas that you may have. What is an alternative reality? I mean, I'd love to hear a follow-up on my question. Like, is it possible for all of these things not to be politicized? Feel free to comment below. And our political whiz Barry will get on to. Well, between the two of us, you are the whiz. I'm just here, super excited, unicorny, not having a clue on what the hell is left and right wing. Well, now I do. Thanks to you. Thank you very much for that. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. We'll see you next time.